Okay, welcome everyone. So I'm super excited to welcome Jay Cunningham, who's joining us from the University of Washington. I first met Jay last May at the Chi conference in Hamburg, where he was a student at the Doctoral Consortium. And I was really impressed with the work he presented. And then I saw him present a full paper at the conference as well, which was really well attended and really, a great deal of discussion in the room afterwards. So yeah, obviously in our seminar series, we've been exploring with different formats in person, but also it's really great to kind of fall back onto this online format, which we developed during the pandemic. But I think it's really great. So we can get Jay, we can beam you in from all the way from Seattle here. And thank you for joining us so early in the morning as well. Um, with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Jay. I'm going to make myself quiet. So the floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Duncan, and I really appreciate the invitation. And it's great to be here at the UCL Interaction Center. And again, my name is Jay Cunningham, and I am a fifth year doctoral student at the University of Washington. I'm in the Department for Human-Centered Design and Engineering. And today I'll be giving a fun talk on a topic that I call critical technology practices and social impact. And this talk is surrounding responsibility, equity, and justice in technology design. Um, and throughout this talk, what I'll do is kind of talk a bit about some of my research and some of my associated works, but also implications of that work, specifically on sociality, on marginalized communities, and the ways in which I think we in design and research have a chance to actually make impact through our work and our contributions. I'm fortunate that I couldn't be here with all of you guys today. I told Duncan that I actually had the chance to visit London back here after the Chi conference in April of last year. And if I could have been there today, I would have loved to visit. So fingers crossed for future interactions in person. But for now, you got me over Zoom, and I'm excited to be chatting. And so we'll go ahead and continue to get started here. This is like a slide with a lot of text on it, but it kind of goes over a bit about me. I mostly study, responsible AI and human experiences. I am originally from like the southeast of the U.S., from Artesia, Mississippi. I studied finished my PhD here at the University of Washington, but I also obtained like my master's in HCI from UW. And also I have a bachelor's of science in computer science from the University of Alabama. I'm really passionate about like ways to imagine more just world through technology innovation.
Oh,
And
sorry, Jay. Sorry to interrupt. I think there might be an issue with your slides. It's still held on your title slide. I'm not sure if that's what you intend. There we go. Now we can see it. Perfect. Thank you so
awesome.
much.
Sorry about that. Okay, so
We're all
hopefully
good.
people. There we go. Sounds great. But yeah, well, here we are. So mostly I study responsible AI and human experiences. I'm originally from the southeast of the US, from Mississippi. Again, I studied my PhD here at the University of Washington, my master's in HCI, and bachelor's in computer science. I'm passionate about ways to imagine more just and equitable worlds through technology. And most of my research centers in socio-technical research, being in like critical computing and technology practices, surrounding mostly topics of race, culture, identity, and power within technology design, and kind of centering more on responsible AI systems and user experiences. So the ways in which I typically define responsibility or impact in AI systems is through this human-centered kind of perspective of like, what are the experiences of people that have to interact with systems, people who are impacted by systems, and people who even build and labor for systems as well. Throughout my graduate work and research, I've had a couple of cool opportunities. And most recently, I was a student researcher at Google, responsible AI research, working on equitable speech recognition. And I've also done some work in inclusive language technologies at Apple human-centered AI machine learning for Siri, and also Microsoft Research Fairness in AI. So had a really great time having a mix between some industry and academic experiences that I think kind of shaped my understanding of some of these topics and how they intersect, especially when it comes to understanding how academia versus industry might consider these topics. And so starting with this really cool quote that I love, this is a poet, her name is Amanda Gorman, and she gave her, she gave a speech at the 2020 presidential inauguration here in the US. And this one line from her poem, The Hill We Climb, says, and the norms and notions of what just is isn't always justice. And I love this quote because seemingly systems, experiences, norms, and practices exist. And just because systems and infrastructures exist doesn't mean that they're always just and that they're always fair. And in turn, that there's always ways for us to rethink and again, reimagine how systems exist in our lives. And over today, I'll go over just a few topics here, but we'll just jump right in. And so, starting this conversation off, I want to kind of pose this maybe question to the audience, and maybe people can use the chat to like interact a little bit. But this kind of question surrounds like, how are new innovations conceived? And how do you consider what is technology? And I ask these questions because I would love to get a kind of thought of like, what do you as the audience consider technologies? What's in technology? What's a technological artifact to you? And essentially, this kind of surrounds the culture of innovation. And kind of in this section, what I want to do is question some of the motives that people have around technology. And I see people in the chat like phones, laptops, chat GPT. Yes, exactly. And so the culture of tech innovation has specifically surrounded this kind of concept of like techno optimism. Move fast, break things. This is a quote that was printed on the offices at Meta, formerly Facebook, when I worked there in 2018. And new technologies always excite us, especially as users. When we see like new devices and systems and tools, we imagine the things that we can do with these technologies. But we have to consider sometimes what drives innovation or what's even considered innovative. In 2023 alone, we witnessed the emergence of novel generative AI technologies that promise to increase productivity, support artistic creation, and better streamline business processes. Holistically, humans tend to be super optimistic about technologies because immediate benefits are more obvious than collateral, unintended, and disproportionate effects. This is what scholars sometimes tend to call techno-optimism. So within the industry context and HCI research, there's this, I think, bit of an allure of producing techno solutions, many of which have vague promises to solve problems that might even not even exist. And so what we do know to be true is that most times innovation is largely driven by capitalism, through artifacts that could be produced that mainly have a lot of stakeholder interest. And so who actually asked for these tools and how are they conceived and are they essential to the ways in which humans interact or humans work? I think someone put in the comment, tools that assist in human goals. I love that because I think that when we think about the lineage of technology and what it means over time, thinking through like how, in the 90s and early 2000s, pagers were a really popular tool, a technology tool. Remember my parents had a pager and I was like so infatuated. I used to like take my mom's pager and be like, like I'm an adult now. And then now kind of seeing how modern day, like how that's kind of evolutionized with the introduction of like, smartphones and other devices that we use more in our day to day. But essentially what those tools have done is they have extended the ways in which we interact with each other. And so this is the quote right here on your left. My friend Deb Raji had posted this a couple of months ago. And it really kind of gets to this point in this point made by Landon Winter, who's a critical technology scholar, has this 1970s quote that says like technical artifacts have political qualities. What matters is not technology itself, but the social or economic system in which it is embedded. And so technical artifacts have political values, and the social determination of technology has an obvious wisdom. It serves as a need corrective to those who focus uncritically on things such as the computer or its social impacts, but fail to look behind technical things to notice the social circumstances of their development, their deployment, and their use. And so this view provides somewhat of an antidote that is naive sometimes to technical determinism. And so that's the idea that technology develops as a sole result of some type of internal dynamic. And those who have not yet recognized the ways in which technologies are shaped by social and economic forces have probably not wanting to be realistic about their technologies impacting people's lives. And so Dev posted this as I was making this slide deck originally. She posted this tweet on Twitter. And she says, if you're building technology and are too insecure to acknowledge the realm of its limits, its guardrails, and criticism, then you are likely not actually creating any real value. And she says, beware of those hypersensitive to scrutiny. They are likely peddling sandcastles and vaporware. All this to say is, if we can't actually be, introspective or retrospective about the things that we're building, what does that mean for the culture of innovation? Back to this kind of concept of what is technology. I think again, someone said this in the comments, how technologies are tools. And that's a point that I love. Technology mostly is a tool, and tools possess an inherent role. For example, the Phillips screwdriver is designed to apply torque via a crosshead to another tool, the Phillips screw fastener, in order to combine materials, mostly wood, together. But tools can be idle. So when a user doesn't need to combine materials together with a screw, the Phillips screwdriver is stored in a toolbox or a tool belt until it is needed again to tighten or loose a screw. Now, this might seem a little rudimentary, but however, the function of the tool is still integral to the experience of the user wielding it. The tool, even when not being used, is not neutral. The tool is operated by a human, and the role that it plays is what gives the tool its purpose. So physical technology, like the screwdriver or a camera or a gun, can be used as intended, or it can be abused. Um, there is a show called Murder, She Wrote, where a screwdriver is wielded as a weapon. And unfortunately, humans have a tendency to also abuse tools more than the intended designer would have preferred. So like screwdrivers being used as murder weapons or police body cameras being used to obstruct justice, the technology is not neutral because human operators are not neutral. And I kind of love this example because I think typically when I'm teaching, I teach this class on critical technology practices, and we talk about what does it mean to operate a tool like this, and if a screwdriver is a tool or is a technology. And it's interesting because the amount of responses that we get is like, oh, well, I mean, it is, but it's like analog. And I'm like, oh, so what's an automatic example of a screwdriver? And I'm like, oh, maybe a power screwdriver. And you think about the different variations of screw driving mechanisms that are able to automate and extend the ways in which we can accomplish and still at the very kind of basis of this combine materials by loosening or fastening to bring something together. Making this more personal, I want to give a really great example. So I grew up in the U.S. Deep South in a rural agricultural community in Northwest Mississippi. My family has a long history with agricultural laboring, stemming from formerly enslaved African ancestors and post-slavery sharecroppers. My grandmother would tell me stories of her grandfather, who was a sharecropper in the early 1900s, on a plantation in which my family was previously owned. Um, and in 1792, the cotton gin was invented by an inventor named Eli Whitney. At the time, Southern planters were in desperate need of a way to make growing of cotton more profitable. Long, stable cotton, which was really easy to separate from its seeds, could be grown along the coast. And the variety that grew inland had these sticky green seeds that were time consuming to pick out of the fluffy white cotton balls. And so Whitney was encouraged to find a solution. And he knew that if he could invent a machine, he could apply for a federal grant for a patent. And if granted, he'd have these exclusive rights for his invention for 14 years. And he could essentially reap a really handsome profit from it. And so a cotton gin, could be this hand crank tool, and larger versions have been harnessed to a horse, driven by mostly like water power. And so this problem of long staple cotton being grown along the coastline seemingly was a problem. And Whitney's solution again was inventing a machine that could pick these green seeds out of the cotton balls. And this is kind of what the machine here looks like. And when I think when he was interviewed at the time about the cotton gin, he has this quote, and he says, "One man and a horse will do more than 50 men with the old machine." Something that he wrote again in like a news article. He says, "It is generally said that those who know anything about it, and I shall make a fortune by it." Meaning that Whitney was not quite interested at all in the idea of like agricultural farming, or the idea of like making agriculture much more widespread. Mississippi was the biggest state with the largest amount of cotton produced between the 18 and 1900s in the U.S. Mississippi was actually considered cotton king. And so if for my family, being that we were largely sharecroppers at the time, most of my ancestors at the time were also picking cotton. And so you can imagine what this type of tool does, or did, to further automate agriculture and automate picking cotton in the area. And so this tool was introduced as a modern technology. And what inherently happened was really, really desperate effects of the cotton gin and the growth of American slavery. Um, and so after the invention of the cotton gin, the yield of raw cotton doubled after a decade in the 1800s. And so demand was fueled by other inventions, the Industrial Revolution, such as the machines to spin and weave and the steamboat to transport it. And by the mid-century, America was growing 3/4 of the world's supply of cotton, and most of it shipped to England or New England, where it was manufactured into cloth. And so during this time, the price of tobacco fell, rice exports at best stayed steady, and sugar began to thrive. But in Louisiana, Mississippi, at mid-century in the South, provided 3/5 of Americans' exports, which was mostly in cotton. And so in 1970, 6 U.S. states were slave states. I mean, in 1790, 6 U.S. states were slave states. And over the next 18 years, Southern plantation owners and farmers imported more than 80,000 Africans to actually work and labor on plantations and in agriculture to produce cotton. By 1808, the U.S. Congress banned slave importation from Africa. But still in 1860, there were still 15 U.S. slave states. And in the South, like states like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, 1 in 3 Southerners were a slave. In the 1900s, sharecropping replaced slave labor largely. And like many inventors, Whitney, who died in 1825, could not have foreseen the ways in which his invention would ultimately change society, maybe for the worse. The most significant thing out of the growth of slavery, out of this was the growth of slavery. While it was true that the cotton gin reduced the labor of removing seeds, it did not reduce the need for slaves and sharecroppers to grow and pick the cotton. In fact, the opposite occurred. Cotton growing became so profitable for planters that it just greatly increased the demand for both land and slave labor. And so because of the cotton gin, slaves now labored on ever-growing plantations where work was more regimented and relentless. As large plantations spread into the Southwest, the price of slaves and the price of slaves and labor inhibited the growth of cities and industries. And again, in 1850s, 7/8 of all immigrants settled in the North, where they found 72% of the nation's manufacturing capacity. The growth of this institution was affecting many aspects of Southern life. And so I share this to kind of, yes, galvanize in so many ways. My grandmother talked about how her grandfather would share that before the cotton gin was introduced, people would go and have to pick like 2 barrels of like cotton a day. At the introduction of the cotton gin, people were having to pick about 6 barrels of cotton. And so it heavily increased the amount of labor, the amount of exploitation, and the abuse that many people who were actually on the ground laboring and doing that work were experiencing at the time, which seemingly was an American Revolution for textile and for clothing and for innovation through this new technology actually only harmed those who are doing the laboring on the ground today. We kind of see some cross correlations today, even with labor within the global South context. People who are data annotators and data workers in nations in the global South are being paid marginal for the work that they're doing that's empowering some of the large language models and generative AI systems that we love to use today. But this invisible labor isn't something that's always apparent to us. And so, again, for every upside of innovation, there is a downside of who is being disproportionately affected by those innovations. And so essentially where we go from here is thinking through how do we design from the margins. And so when they are designed for, we are all designed for. And so we as designers or researchers, in so many ways need to radically shift how we are building our technologies to mitigate further harm. The reality is that making better, safer, and less harmful technology requires a design based on the lived experiences of those who are the most marginalized. And so these edge cases are frequently ignored as being outside of the scope of a typical user's likely experiences, yet they are powerful indicators for understanding the flaws in our technologies. This is why I refer to these cases of people, groups, and communities who are the most impacted and least supported as decentered. The decentered are the most marginalized and often most criminalized. By understanding and establishing who is most impacted by distinct social, political, and even legal frameworks, we can understand who would most likely be a victim of the weaponization of certain technology innovations. And as an added benefit, technology which has recentered the extremes will always be generalizable to the broader usership. And so a decentered design process is not about increasing capitalistic profitability, but reducing tech-induced harms by removing the focus from the ill-conceived stronghold of who seem to be the main power of users to accounting for the margins which help us to understand a broader aspect of who to design for. Essentially, designing for these marginal edge cases of people surrounding aspects like race, sexuality, gender, age allows us to have a more holistic view of design and who people actually are. And so I want to give this kind of aspect of, I want to talk on this aspect of discriminatory design. Earlier, I kind of mentioned about the politics of artifacts. And I'm going to play this small clip from researcher and scholar Dr. Ruha Benjamin. And essentially what we'll learn from this clip is about how design can be explicitly or implicitly inequitable, and how physical infrastructures, digital design can all be used to harm or disenfranchise people. And historically, marginalized and vulnerable communities are often the most impacted by bad design. And so in doing this, I kind of echo this question that Dr. Benjamin asks of what kind of future are we envisioning and for whom? And let me know if you can hear the audio. I'm going to just a second here, present on. All right. Can everybody see?
Sitting on this bench in California on a recent trip, for that few minutes before moving on with the business of the trip, I just wanted to lay down for a few minutes and soak in some sunshine. And I quickly realized that I couldn't lay down on the bench. Something was wrong with the bench. Whoever had designed the bench decided to put armrests on it. And while I don't think it was created to give me trouble, I'm pretty sure that the armrests were put there to deter loiterers from laying down on the bench. And with a little digging, what I realized was actually this idea of discriminatory design is a global phenomenon. I found single occupancy benches in Helsinki. I came across caged benches in France. And I think the most poignant example for me has been the metered bench, where you actually have to pay to sit down, otherwise the spikes won't go down. All right, so single occupancy, caged, and the spiked metered bench, right? And so, this was created by a German artist to actually get us thinking about this issue of the privatization of public life. But it's actually been taken up by cities in a number of places in the world to actually deter what they consider bench hogging. One US government rep said with respect to loiterers at bus stops, "They're not our customers, and our customers come first." And I think this statement actually captures the ethos of many policies that govern public life, where we the customer, not we the people, come first. I think at the heart of discriminatory design is this idea that we can create technological fixes for social crises. Whether the crises have to do with housing or healthcare, public safety, or education, rather than dealing with the underlying conditions, we create short-term responses that often get the issue out of sight, out of mind. And these responses too often locate the problem inside kinds of people, like the so-called loiterer, rather than deal squarely with the political and economic conditions that create the need to sleep on a park bench in the first place. So if we think broadly with this idea of discriminatory design, just as a park bench reflects particular social values, so too is the lab bench and medical research imbued with a range of values. So with respect to the biotechnology revolution, the kinds of questions that researchers ask, where they go looking for the answers, and who they consult along the way are all crucial for us to consider. Another way to think about this is to ask whose voices are missing at the lab bench as important decisions are being made. Because I think without careful consideration of this, we really risk reproducing existing social inequalities, whether it has to do with race or gender, class, disability, nationality. We unwittingly design it into new biotechnologies. And so what I want to suggest to you is that the customer is not always right. That is to say that the interests and the concerns of the most affluent among us should not unduly govern the decisions that affect everyone. In fact, I would say that we have to actively seek the input of those who are potentially harmed by new biotechnologies. And so with that, what I want to do now is just switch gears a little bit and share 3 stories of discrimination.
Awesome. So I think that you also can find this talk also on YouTube, and I would invite folks to check out the full talk. But just this kind of one aspect of it, something that I heard a couple years ago, and I've had a chance to just talk and connect more with Dr. Benjamin, And she's also actually a really great friend and mentor. One thing that we kind of both agree on through some of our works is that, like, you know, design is a responsibility that many of us have, and as researchers and as people that have a chance to actually question where technology lives in the lives of people around us, being able to kind of read between the lines and consider the infrastructure, the politics, the socio-political aspects of the questions that we ask are really, really important. Something as simple as a park bench, again, is imbued with values of those that create it, and values being that, you know, people thinking around who ought to take up space and who ought to be in the spaces in which these benches are placed in. And what we learn is that design is power, and the decisions that we as designers and researchers make have implications for users' experiences. Um, and we have an innate power as scholars and as designers to create inclusive and equitable products. And if design is power, we can also view the things that we do as inherent to impacts and processes around us. And so view my lovely Venn diagram of questions that, you know, I typically am reflective and asking for myself, thinking around who has benefited from my design or research, who participates in my design or research processes, and who is even harmed by the design or research as well. Design processes and principles play a critical role in the viability and feasibility and practicality of how people actually can take advantage of systems. And so kind of back to this aspect that was introduced at the top of this talk of how technology is not neutral, according to technology and cultural scholar Melvin Krasenberg, and his laws of technology states that technology is either good nor bad, nor is it neutral. In this retrospect, we kind of see that there's this cycle where, like, human-shaped technology through our inception, personal values, and cognitive biases. Technology changes societies either through economic incentives, behavioral conditions, and deciding who gets heard, and how society shapes other humans through shared values, power structures, and norms. And essentially, we kind of see that this cycle feeds itself. The more that we introduce new technologies, doesn't necessarily dictate how we as people interact with each other. It actually only amplifies and scales the ways in which we have typically interacted. And again, whether that's for good or for bad, as I think is subjective and objective of who you are and where you sit in this paradigm of being the individuals that decide the harms or the individuals that are impacted by the implications. And so we've seen and are aware of so many different, I guess, non-neutralities in AI and technology innovations. No matter how the lineage of technology exists, the various isms perpetuated by our societies will evolve into their technical forms. Many of these technologies have facilitated new forms of connection and creativity, but the benefits and the harms of technologies have not been distributed equally. Increased digital surveillance, automated discrimination, and recommendation systems that amplify misinformation are a few examples of how existing inequities become embedded and amplified by computing technologies and harm the most vulnerable populations. And so at the core of kind of, I guess, this inquiry is thinking through, you know, how might stewards of technology engage critical practices that promote a landscape of just and equitable tech futures now? And what does that mean is, like, really adjusting for a critical lens. And so when I was an undergrad in engineering, the topics we discussed seemed so distant from our real life. In my education, I took a number of courses in software engineering, data structures, algorithms, systems engineering. And I took one course on, I think, like, computing ethics and privacy, which centered techniques of building for system integrity. I essentially had no formal training in computing education that engaged topics of bias, inclusion, or equity. I was trained to technically solve problems, but not to critically examine the implications of my designs or inventions. But fortunately, I came to graduate school, but I would argue that most industry software engineers and designers don't need a PhD to design responsibly. And responsible computing and design is a new way that's educating graduating technologists. And these technologies will ultimately bring more holistic thinking into the design of new technologies, fueling an industry-wide culture shift. And the challenge supports the conceptualization, development, and piloting of new curricula that empowers students and learners to think about the social and political context of computing. And so socio-technical research and design inquiry allows designers and researchers to adjust the lens in which we are able to address problems and even the wicked ones. In typical, I think, computing education, we've not seen a lot of, again, like intersectional, liberal in so many ways, like arts and perspectives. But I think I would argue that this type of education is super, super important because as designers and most of us that are trained and receive a bachelor's degree, we go straight into industry and we go there with these skills and we assume that we are well equipped. And what we do know is that when people join teams, there's already cultures in place. But if you have not had this type of learning and education, it's ultimately up to organizations to account for themselves. And so I think that there currently needs to be like a shift in how we view these type of topics, even being introduced at like the undergraduate level for designers and for engineering students. And so good design should encompass global inclusion, moving past just Western perspectives of design and recognizing humanity across various societies, norms, and dimensions. And what may be acceptable in one society might be dangerous in another. And so on this kind of aspects of like, how do you question like skepticism about like technology? And essentially, I think what I argue is that um, humans tend to be optimistic about technologies, but immediate benefits are more obvious, again, than those that are disproportionate. And so here is a long kind of list of different technologies, or not different kind of questions that we can ask ourselves as designers when considering and designing for technologies. And so 5 things that we might need to know about technological change. Questions like, what does society give up for the benefit of a certain technology? Are there trade-offs for that? Who is harmed and who benefits from these new innovations? What does the technology need? Because all technologies carry biases and beliefs about the world and the impacts of people around us. What are the intended or unintended, consequences caused by technology? And why might it be difficult for some of us to even imagine a world without the technology? Again, like because there's evolution of tools over time, the way that we view technology is actually only indicative of like how we were introduced to them. And so many times I ask myself when trying to solve problems, it's like, okay, if I didn't have to have like a computer or an AI or a system doing this, if this was totally based just on social interaction, how would I solve this? And I think what I find oftentimes is that these aren't technological issues, they're social issues, and technology is just a vehicle for social interactions. And so I think many times what we can do is kind of provide this like neutral gaze over like what issues actually are, because we are too busy maybe trying to find quick fixes with technological innovations, when many times again we can just think about solving them through peer-to-peer. And if you're able to conceptualize that well, then thinking through actual technological applications that are impactful and necessary have much better consequences and impact. And so how do we design like non-neutral technologies? And what does it mean to be equity and justice oriented in our design works? And so in kind of, my field and I guess maybe our field of human-centered design, we believe in starting with the people, not just the technology. And so given that technology is not neutral, where do we start? Starting with the user is best versus starting with that technology. And as a UX designer or educator, um, going about designing solutions that attempt to avoid the pitfalls of some unintended consequences can be inherent through its non-neutral state. And so users have needs where technology has goals. And a technology is good at what we as people design it for, and who we design it for should be versed in the role that technology plays. And so if we as designers, because we're people and we're human, can fall prey to the idea that technology is a solution or that technology is always positive, when in fact that's not true. We have to design in a way to be positive and to maybe circumvent and hopefully prevent technology from being used for bad. And so when we design for people, example, like for police officers, because yes, police officers are people, then we might end up with solutions that have less technology versus more and allow for very different solutions than, say, a surveillance camera system to be the artifact in which we think is necessary. And so, again, thinking through, who the user might be for a certain system and evaluating, citizen needs, society needs, technology needs, and system needs, we're able to actually maybe see things much more clearer and necessary to counteract some of these disproportionate impacts. Some conceptual frameworks that I love currently is this kind of idea like design justice. Sasha Cortanza-Choke is a researcher and scholar that has kind of coined this aspect of design justice and thinking through these community-led practices to build the worlds that we need. And so design justice aims to explicitly challenge rather than reproduce structural inequalities. And it has emerged from a growing community of designers in various fields who work closely with social movements and community-based organizations around the world. And design justice essentially demonstrates how universalist design principles and practices can erase certain groups of people. Trying to design for everyone sometimes allows us to miss who is intersectionally disadvantaged or experiences the underside of power and privilege. And so there are 10 core principles in the work that I'll share, and we situate some of these principles. And I think like the first principle here, and one of my favorite ones is just like how we design, we use design to sustain and heal and empower our communities, as well as seek liberation from exploitation and oppressive systems. This framework can be maybe seen as principles or values, but if you are someone who is looking for maybe something to hold on to or something to have, or if you, in my experiences as an instructor, I have challenged students to create designs and solutions based off of this design justice framework, and to even show and to tell how they're designed to either honor some of these principles or why some of these principles are core to what designs are. And I find that it oftentimes challenges us to think super, super critically about what's important. And there's so many different concepts, and I'm just kind of showing this as just like a framework and guide here. But when we think about how do we meaningfully engage with topics such as ethics, equity, and justice in our design process, again, we've seen some of these questions a couple times throughout this presentation. But considering equity, who benefits, values, scopes, sites of where we design, ownership and accountability, discourse, and even histories are all things that are super, super, super necessary and impactful. And I think that, again, when we fall into the culture of like fast design, rapid design, many times we find that we don't have time to consider these. But again, we argue that it is okay, and it's okay to slow down, and to sometimes produce slow tech that actually is able to speak to and honor some of these values. And applying equity-centered design means considering how we as designers can move toward fostering more justice, equity, and inclusion, even in our work. And so things that we can do, like, making our values more explicit to prioritize design that shift advantages from people in the matrix of domination. Thinking through our practices, the narratives in which we use to design, going back to, again, those sites and who we actually honor and where we do that. And even, again, how I spoke about earlier, pedagogy, what we teach and what we learn, approaches like critical community technology pedagogies, participatory action research, data feminism, can help technology be taken back by people and used as a tool of liberation. This kind of last section of my talk, and the few minutes that I have left, again, centers on recentering people within the margins. This is a quote from the Creative Reaction Lab that was developed in Ferguson, Missouri in 2018 after the murder of an 18-year-old Black man by the name of Michael Brown. And this reaction lab was created by community members in response to thinking around redesigning and reimagining the justice system and how civics plays a role into also police accountability. And they say, and if oppression, inequalities, and inequities are designed, they can be redesigned. As we strive for human equity, we have to be able to recognize inequity and have the ability to recognize ourselves as designers who have the power to disrupt it. And so essentially, responsible design, inclusive design, equitable design, we as designers acknowledge that our artifacts can be harmful. And these are all aspects of critical design practices. And critical design practices makes values explicit. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, even said this, those of us who create technology and make the rules that govern it have the profound responsibility to the people we serve. Let's embrace that responsibility. And so if technology, isn't neutral, who's responsible for its impacts? And the last few topics that I will kind of touch on here really briefly sounds like, critical data and AI. Currently, with the proliferation of AI systems, research and frameworks addressing the ethical use of AI have revealed just how much human input goes into autonomous systems. But thinking through how might training data perpetuate historical systemic biases, what outcomes, are your models optimizing for? Who gets to determine the conditions of fairness? What began as a wave of concerns for AI's unchecked autonomy has uncovered all the human decisions and design choices at every step of the way. And that has helped more people see how technologies, including data itself, is embedded with human values and assumptions, and therefore shape or constrain behaviors based on their affordances. One of my personal, I think, favorite data scientists, and I think pioneers in the data industry, was a woman by the name of Ida B. Wells. And Ida B. Wells is a great example of how data science was used as a tool of social justice, even in 1895. Ida B. Wells used her background in education and journalism to undertake incredibly dangerous reporting of lynchings in the American U.S. South. She collected qualitative and quantitative data from communities affected by these horrors and injustices. She was a pioneer that we would consider to be a data scientist today. And Ida B. Wells was a journalist, actually, and she was the first co-owner and editor of a Black newspaper called the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight in the U.S. And so after the lynching of her friends in 1892, she started writing anti-lynching editorials. And by 1894, her words angered so many white folks in Memphis, Tennessee. After her publication, her house was burned down and she and her family actually moved to Chicago. It was there that she published this amazing record called A Red Record, which tabulated statistics and alleged causes of lynchings in the United States, where she documented 728 lynching cases that occurred between 1884 and 1892 using research by the Chicago Tribune. And I think what is really galvanizing about her work and by other scholars at this time were that they were people that contextualized data points that capture and enshrine the state of the Black experience in the United States. Another person was W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the first Black man to graduate with a PhD in sociology from Harvard University in 1895. And Dr. Du Bois was also a data scientist. And he created these amazing data visualizations by hand, by the way, that were able to really encapsulate and summarize the cultural, economic, and social conditions of Black people in the United States, as well as challenge stereotypes of Black people living in the state of Georgia. He created over 363 images and 67 infographics. And his focus was specifically on presenting work surrounding the distribution of Black populations by county, And at the bottom half of this map here, again, I'm from Mississippi. This is Alabama, Georgia. And it's really interesting that even now, two counties in the state of Georgia with the highest Black populations, even today, there's still correlations of what Dr. Du Bois seen in 1895 and what we're able to see today. And so we still create native visualizations like W.E.B. Du Bois did, albeit not by hand, to help us convey compelling pieces. And so data science can be used as a really great way for social justice and for galvanizing impacts and effects on technology, on people's lives, and the ways in which we tell stories. In my own research, I've really centered my work on Black community-centered research and technology, embracing principles that afford the explicit foregrounding of Black lives and Black bodies in America, engaging Black community in my technology designs, and embracing interdisciplinary approaches in tech design as well. This has kind of bled over into my research in equitable speech recognition, addressing the accent gaps in accessibility and language ideologies and voice assistants, being that everyday voice-enabled devices and software rely heavily on AI, and automated speech recognition, which converts user speech and text and interprets data, has challenges with certain speakers' voices. Research in the kind of HCI field has often exposed the challenges and limitations of automated speech recognition, being that these systems are going to work best for white, highly educated, upper middle class Americans, probably from the West Coast, because that's the group that has access to the technology from the beginning. Rachel Tapman, a researcher that published work on the effects of automated speech recognition and disparities, is the quote from one of her papers. And so essentially, standard American English is the default in which US commercial speech recognition technology is trained for, and systems can be ill-equipped for linguistic diversity. So the promises of automated speech recognition systems aren't always evenly distributed. So people with accents like myself, with regional lists, dialects, and jaws, people who are non-native English speakers, all experience these challenges based on, again, who you are, based on how language technologies have been trained and developed as well. And so these performance gaps have a number of challenges, limitations, from accessibility challenges, racial disparities for ethnic and cultural dialects and native languages, gender biases, assuming gender and even uneven representation, and then also language ideologies, social norms around what is even acceptable English. And the much of the work, again, that I have been looking at in my graduate work has surrounded the phenomena of African-American language and automated speech recognition. And as users of speech recognition systems, Black American speakers' language are often less recognized and processed, leading to these, again, inequitable interactions within the community of users. So when we think about, moving toward equitable speech recognition, closing this representation gap means grappling with a few things, and that's recognizing that all these tools don't work well or equally for all subgroups of people. Involving diverse voices and underrepresented perspectives is super critical and important. Counteracting biases against Black American English speakers are less acceptable, less intelligent, and less respectable than any other language variety. Creating more linguistically diverse and inclusive data sets, collecting data from communities in ways that engages them appropriately and respectfully, and going beyond, again, traditional quick fix methods of user-centered design and promoting collaborative and participatory approaches. In so many ways, what we are kind of looking at now is this kind of concept of public interest technology, this interdisciplinary approach that demands that technology be designed and deployed in regulated and responsible and equitable ways. And so in leaving and ending, because I know I am just about at time, much of the work that myself and my advisors have been doing in our research have really kind of centered these critical technology practices, asking these questions, posing these really challenging aspects of what it means to design for certain communities. And through recently the Google Award for Inclusive Research, we developed what we now call the Black Community Research Advisory Board in our department, where we are collectively engaging with Black community-based organizations and civic leaders to collaboratively envision technology futures that are ideal for Black American users of technologies through community input, action, and accountability. But thank you guys so much for listening to me talk. And I'd be happy to take any questions that folks might have. I appreciate your engagement.
Thank you so much, Jay. A round of applause here. Okay. I'm going to pause the recording.